the package arrived on my desk. There it was. I'd been working for weeks, visualizing, analyzing, and creating my very first design in my very first job as a mechanical engineer. And here, finally, on my desk, was the box of parts. With a lot of excitement and just a teensy bit of trepidation, I open up the parts, I start putting them together, and the thought goes through my mind of like, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. This is like Christmas, that same feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm opening a package, I'm putting it together, and I'm seeing how these parts work. I loved being a mechanical engineer. It was so much fun. So how does someone who loves engineering that much go to a position where I am today, which is the CEO of a company? I'm going to lead you through this journey with me together. And as I think back, it all actually started in that very first job. As I look as to why I got to where I was, what are the skills I had, what are the skills I developed, it started very early on. In that first job, I was working on the design of these parts, and I realized after a couple weeks that maybe the client wasn't really aware of all the great work we were doing and the decisions we were making. So I asked the senior engineer on the project, I said, hey, would it be okay if I send a summary at the end of every week saying, here's what we've been doing? And he said, yeah, sure, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you go for it? So I started doing that and just took an hour every Friday and said, here's everything that we've been doing. At the time, I didn't realize that that was unique and that not all engineers happen to do that. It just felt like the right thing to do to communicate what I was doing. That very first lesson of communicating, even when I didn't have to, has carried me through. And later I heard from my boss, from that client, when it was time to do the next project, he said, the client called me up and said, hey, can Dorota be on the next project? She did such great work on it. And I realized at that moment that I wasn't the only one doing great work. There were other engineers in the company doing equally great work. The difference was that I communicated about it, and I took that initiative. Two other important points about that story. The first is that I asked. I didn't just jump in there and start sending emails to the client or to whoever the lead would be in a different department. I asked if that would be appropriate, because it could have been a very costly career mistake to have just started doing that, assuming that was the right thing to do and not understanding what was right for that client. And the second point that was pretty important to do was once I had started doing these Friday reports, I had to keep doing them. 3 weeks into it, you're leaving, it's a Friday, you want to go home early. You really don't feel like doing it anymore. But it would look a lot worse to have started doing it and stopped than never have done it in the first place. So my second lesson, and this is true then, it's true now, it's true in your personal life, is to stick to those commitments when it's hard, because that's when it matters. There's always a reason not to do something, and there's always a really good excuse. But the people that do it, even though it's hard and they have a really good reason not to, are the ones that become strong leaders, because then we can count on them. And as I look at the engineers in my company and the ones that I promote, it's the ones I don't have to sit there and follow up and hope they actually did what they said they would do. I just know it's going to happen. That's easy for me. That makes my life easy. The technical skill is important, but man, that follow-up and that commitment is what sets people apart. I was promoted very fast. I went from a mechanical engineer to a senior mechanical engineer in about 2 years. There were other engineers in my company, one of them in particular I remember, who had pretty much the exact same credentials. We'd both go on to the same graduate school. He was super smart. And he did good quality work. And he wasn't promoted. He actually complained at one point in time that he hadn't been promoted for years after I had been promoted. And the difference was not the quality of the technical work. I asked my boss at one point in time, I said, why did you promote me so fast? It actually felt really fast. And he said, listen, you're doing the technical work of a senior engineer. You are showing up as a technical engineer, as a senior mechanical engineer. And most importantly, when I go to a client site and you present your work, you have that instant credibility that you know what you're talking about and the quality of your work is excellent. And unfortunately, the other engineer had a very laid-back, lackadaisical, kind of more of a skater dude attitude about him. And that hurt him. So that lesson was not, you have to have the technical chops to do the work. You have to be a good engineer or analyst or whatever your job is. But how you present yourself and how you present your work is just as important. And that gets recognized. In my next annual review, I asked my supervisor, well, they said, come up with some goals. You're supposed to come up with goals. And I said, well, I would like to do project management. I said, I think I would really enjoy that. And his reaction to that was, yeah, you would be really good at that. Now, the reason his reaction was, yeah, you would be really good at that is, back up 2 years, I'd been sending reports to clients and communicating what we'd been doing on all of my work. And so it was really easy for him to see that extension of, well, I'm already doing it for my projects. And this is a picture of one of my really early mechanical designs of a golf club bending machine, which was really fun to design. So if you're already doing it for your own projects, it's not that much of a stretch, and it's not that much of a risk to promote you to a project manager because you've already demonstrated those behaviors in your job. And so as you look at where you are today and where you want to go, and if you just say, OK, I'm doing my job that's defined right here. It's defined this way. And yeah, the next job has these other skills, but I'm not in that job, so I just need to sit back and do my job really well. Yeah, you might get promoted. But there's more risk for your manager to promote you because they don't know if you're going to be able to do that job. And even if you don't have those opportunities within your own job, if you take those leadership opportunities through the WIN network, through outside organizations like Society of Women Engineers or other opportunities to show your leadership, it's going to be a lot easier because you can say, oh yeah, and here's when I organized this, and here's when I did this in a leadership position. And really, you're trying to reduce the heartache for your manager, right? They're going to be graded also on how well they promote their team. And if they pick the wrong person, they don't want to do that. Once I had been, so I did get the project manager position. And once I had a few successful projects under my belt, my boss came to me and said, hey, Dorota, I've got a great opportunity for you. I would like you to manage the biggest projects that's going on in our office. And we had a small company. It's got 20 mechanical engineers on it. Oh, and by the way, it's a month behind schedule, and the client's not all that happy. So I said, sure, I'll do it. So when you're put in that situation where something isn't perfect and you don't really know how you're going to solve it yet, let me tell you what I did in that situation and the lesson that I learned. I spent the first day on that job at the client site. Whoever your stakeholder is, I'm talking external clients, but of course this applies to other departments, other stakeholders. And I spent the day getting to know him as an individual and more importantly, getting to understand what was important about this program and why. So this was a design of a whole new printer. And usually when you have a project, there's three key factors you've got to worry about. You got to worry about schedule, you got to worry about price, and you got to worry about quality. And usually, while you try to do everything the best you can do 2 out of the 3 really well, unless you have an infinite budget, an infinite schedule, they're just throwing money at you. Not in the reality I know. So I wanted to figure out what areas I could kind of have the most compromise in. So I asked him, I said, well, tell me about this project. Where are we in it? How's it going? And he said, well, it's the first build of this printer, and we're going to do 3 more prototype builds, and we're going to transfer it to manufacturing and production in another about year or so. I said, okay, that helps me understand it. And I said, well, how important is schedule on this build? He said, well, if this build is late, then the others are late, then everything's late, and it really kills our time to market. So schedule is absolutely important. It's paramount. Well, great. I'm glad we're a month behind schedule. This is what I'm thinking. I didn't say that out loud. So then I'm like, OK, so obviously schedule's pretty important for this project. What about price? So I asked, well, do we have any room for like expedite fees? Can we somehow speed things up? What's the budget? Can we add more people to the program? How much leeway do we have with that? He said, well, the budget is actually fairly fixed. It's a big program. We're kind of where we are. So there's really not much wiggle room there on the price. So then I knew I had one more lever left, which was quality. Now, the last thing you want to do is ask someone, hey, do you want this product to have high quality or low quality? That's not how you phrase that question. Because, of course, you want the highest quality you can have. So the way that I phrased the question was more in a scenario. I said, so let's say that we get 95% of the functionality, because you're never going to get 100% on the first build. We're engineers. It's an iterative process. Nothing works perfect. So I'm not kidding myself that's going to be 100%. But I said, let's say we get 95% of functionality in this build, but it's still about a month late. Or let's say that even though we want to get to 95%, we get to 80% functionality, but it's right on time. What's the better scenario? He said, oh, absolutely. On time is more important. 80%. We can handle that. There's future builds. We'll figure out how to make it work. We're here to learn from this build. Bam. I had my answer without saying, hey, is low quality OK? And so then I went back to my engineering team. And I asked them, what's going on here? Why are we late? What's going on? I kind of did it on an individual basis. And they're like, well, I'm designing this part. It's going to be great. We're going to do all these things on it. And I'm doing all this analysis work. And they're doing great work. Because engineers do great work because they love to do engineering. And we're some of us maybe, a little bit perfectionists. And we want it right. And the issue there was a lack of clarity about what was the most important on the program, and lack of understanding what those needs were. By listening to the client and understanding the needs first, I could figure out my game plan, my plan of attack for getting this program back on track. So I had to spend that time with the client understanding what those needs really were. And then I realized my next task was then to communicate that to the team and get them on track. So we had a schedule. We figured out what the client would want to meet. And so 20 engineers, about 200, 300 parts, bill of materials. There's a lot of complexity behind designing a product, as all of you know. Whether it's software, whether it's mechanical, whatever the case may be, there's a lot of decisions and a lot of complexity. So I took that bill of materials and I made sure that line for line, and this is spreadsheet work. I love spreadsheet work. I'm an engineer. I can do spreadsheet work. So line for line, every single part had to be on there. And I looked at the manufacturing process. Is it going to be machined? How are we going to make the part? What's the lead time? And I organized all this data. And then what I did is, rather than keeping it on my little computer screen, staring at it, I had it printed out 4 foot by 6 foot, and I stuck it on the wall. with every engineer's name on every part, with what their release date was in order to meet the schedule. I held once a week, a half-hour meeting for the whole team, because they needed to get some parts done. We're not wasting time in meetings. Half hour, that's all we get. Separate sub-meetings, and they can have offline discussions. And I said, okay, we got to get these parts out on time. We have to instill confidence that we can do this as a team. And I said, and I don't care if it's not perfect. I am giving you permission for it not to be perfect. Just get it out on time. And with that visibility and that accountability of having each line there on the wall, that every time they passed, there's my name, there's the date, and I went in there with a pen the day that it was due, and I said, is your part getting released today? It's due today. Yeah, no, it's getting out. And putting the dates right there, that's being released. And by having that visibility and that clarity of getting a very complex project organized, we got it out on time. The client was happy. And did it work at 80%? Nah, probably. It was like 85%. There were issues. There's always issues. But it was okay. We had 2 more builds to fix those issues, and the product was successfully released into the marketplace. The lesson there was to develop ways of presenting complex data in a very simple way. And as you get higher in leadership, you realize how important this is. So when you're in school and you do a problem set, how do you do it? You sit there and you have what the problem is, you show all your work, and at the end you come up with your magic answer, you put a big circle around it, you hand in your work. When you go into leadership, you have to change that way of presenting data. So instead of saying, here's the magic answer at the end, you actually have to give people the answer first. And if you look at financial presentations and high-level reports, you want to know, well, what's the bottom line first? And then if I want to, I'll dig into all the data. As engineers, we love data, and we want to show that work. But that's the lesson I had to learn, is that's not necessarily the right way of doing it anymore. And so this example here is a risk assessment. So when we do a project, we assess what's the risk. And risk is the probability times the severity of that happening. And so on one side here, you have my spreadsheet, because I love spreadsheets. We all love spreadsheets. They're great. But if I show you that spreadsheet, yeah, if you're an engineer, you'll love to go through the detail. But the people you're showing it to probably aren't as detail-oriented as you are. So you got to figure out what's the way to present it in a real easy way. So I translate that into what you see here with the color-coded chart. And at a glance, I know that risk number 10, number 9, and number 6 are the ones I have to worry about, because they are in the red, and I am coming up with a handling plan to get them out of the red and into the yellow and hopefully into the green. One glance, really easy, very clear where we're addressing it. In 2008, I moved to Portland. I grew up in Southern California. That's where the home office is in San Diego. And I was given the opportunity to be the director of the office up here. How many of you were in the workforce in 2008, 2009? How was the economic environment in 2008 and 2009? It sucked. So I was still very optimistic. I'm like, hey, I'm moving up here. I'm going to run an office. This is going to be great. This was August of 2008, so it was still the very beginning, kind of not really knowing what was going to happen. And I said, well, now I've got a whole new set of skill sets to learn. Not only am I project managing now, I'm running an office. I got to figure out financials. I got to meet people. I got to get out in the community. I went to Society of Women Engineers events. I went to business events. I started to meet other leaders of adjacent firms, like industrial design firms and manufacturing firms. I'm like, this is a whole different set of skills I have to learn. I am an introvert. My very first job, I went on a business trip. I was sitting at a business dinner next to the client, and I said, 0 words. I was petrified. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to say. I'm just going to eat my food. And I say that because then I know there's introverts here in the audience, and there's hope. These are skill sets you can learn. And if you want to progress in your career and become a leader, you can learn to speak. You can learn to talk to other people. You can learn to network. And yes, it's petrifying the first time you do it, but the more you do it, it gets easier, I promise. So the lesson I learned here when I became the director of the office was one of people and who I knew. So what happened was in early 2009, we had about 7 people in the office. So it was a very small office, 1 main client. I'm going to grow business. This is going to be great. We're going to create a design center. This is going to be awesome. With 2 weeks' notice, our client had incredible cutbacks, had to shut down a building, and said, yes, 5 of those 7 positions are gone. I'm really sorry to tell you about that. I said, okay. As my stomach is just dropping to the floor. I had never dealt with anything like that before, because it wasn't just about me. It was about my employees and my engineers. And I didn't know what to do. And we did what we could. We job shared. We tried to call everybody we knew as there were client work. But the economy was dead then. No one was doing projects. Incredibly talented engineers were not able to find jobs. And the only reason that I'm up here today and that office survived is because I networked with people. And there was one project that I call kind of my bridge across the Great Recession project, the design of this wind turbine here, that allowed me to hire back a few of the engineers and make it until the next project started to come up again. And the only reason I got that project was because of who I knew, not what I knew, and not how good of an engineer I was. So as you think about networking, and this is why you're here, it's really hard to network when you think about, well, what can I get out of it? Because you feel kind of slimy. You're like, I don't want to like say, hey, I need a job. But what really helps me with networking is thinking about how I can help others. And that gets me out, and how I can make friends with others, and not about what's in it for me, and am I going to get a job out of this, or am I going to get that next project or that next promotion? If you genuinely want to learn about others and see how you can help them, it actually does get a lot easier. Because, remember, it is kind of fun to make friends. And so use that when you're out there and when you're networking. This next lesson here about ownership thinking relates a little bit back to the very first one. The lesson number 4, I think, was demonstrating the behaviors of the job you want. So I was the director of the office, and there were times when there were things going with the company that I wasn't real happy with. And you have a choice there, right? You can complain, which I don't ever suggest to do, because don't ever complain. Or you can offer constructive feedback and give good suggestions. And what I would do is I'd pull one of the owners aside and I'd say, I don't think this is working really well. Here's my plan for what I think we should do. That's what ownership thinking is about. So if you get your budget cut, you can sit there, oh, it sucks, my budget's cut 20%. This is really lame. That puts you in a powerless position. That is not a leadership quality. But if you seek to understand, well, why was that budget cut? What are the financial implications because of that? What can I do about it? What is a plan? That puts you in a leadership quality. So a couple of years after I'd been running the office, the founder of the company comes to me and he says, I really don't want to run this company anymore. I've been doing this for a lot of years. I'd like you to take over. Because of demonstrating this ownership thinking. And as all aspiring leaders, I said, no. And the reason I said no, by the way, if you really want the job, don't say no. I said no for personal reasons. My daughter was 4 years old, and my son was 6, he was in first grade, and I was spending Fridays at home with my daughter. I was working a reduced week, and I knew I would never get that time back again. And while I could somehow manage to run an office on 30 hours a week, don't ask me how I did that, I was extremely efficient. I knew I couldn't run a whole company on 30 hours a week. And I told them, I said, you know, I'm honored that you would select me. I can't do this right now. I have to put my family first. That's what's really important for me. And I know I would regret that if I did that and wasn't able to have that year with her more at home. And he said, okay, I understand that. And, you know, I got some time. So a year rolls around, and I enroll my daughter in full-day kindergarten. And he calls me, and he goes, hey, Dorota, so I hear your daughter's in full-day kindergarten now. And I said, yeah, she is. So how about taking over my job now? And I said, okay, I'll do it. And what the lesson there was, I had no idea how to be the CEO and a president of a company. But I said yes. And I'll tell you a secret. Most people don't know how to do the job that they're really aspiring to do. But you still say yes because you're smart, you're capable, you know you can learn, and you know you can ask for help and get support. And especially as women, I think we have this, we put so much pressure on ourselves that we have to be 100% sure we can do the job before we take it on. And you don't. You can be 80%, you can be 60% sure and then work really hard because you're demonstrating those behaviors and you can figure it out. Did I know how to be a CEO? No. But I started reading books. I started attending, you know, anything about how do you be a CEO? There's YouTube videos. All right, I'll figure this out. What are the skill sets? Right? I'm sure I can do this. And you can figure it out. And I went to groups, and it's been a lot of fun. And that's one of the things that you have to think about in your passion and your calling here is you have to love it. And I loved being an engineer, but I realized how much I actually had fun being a CEO of the company. And yes, it's a ton of responsibility, and you're responsible for all these jobs. But I could affect change, not just in myself, but in others and in how the whole company was structured. And so my effectiveness as a leader, I realize now, is not about me. It's about my team. And it's how do I motivate my team to accomplish great results. This is a wearable product that my team designed. When I was first in my career, I was so excited about what I could do and what idea I could have and how could it be out in the market and how cool that was going to be. And now with these wearables and all this IoT stuff, my team can do that. And I can be so proud of them because I am spearheading the organization so that they can achieve. So I leave you with what I've learned and where I am, and I'm still obviously on my leadership journey. That leadership is not just about you. It's about the change you can make in the world. And most importantly, you want that change to last, and to last even after you're gone. Thank you.